innocent spouse as a solution for resolving an IRS problem can be a fantastic solution. It's actually something that's very highly technical. There's actually 3 different ways to obtain innocent spouse relief, and we're going to talk about them real quick and what they mean and how they might apply to your particular case. The first type of innocent spouse that I'm going to discuss is what I call classic innocent spouse. And what that means is that essentially that you were in a relationship, you were married to your spouse, and your spouse was less than honest with you about his or her income tax liabilities. Oftentimes that they lied to you, perhaps even had you file or sign a false tax return, and that through no fault of your own, there's now a joint liability for which you were responsible, and you should not be held responsible due to their deception and so on. The second type of innocent spouse is actually called a separate liability election, and what that means is that if you don't qualify for classic innocent spouse, then you can apply for what's called a separate liability election. And what it means is that if you currently, I guess you have a joint liability because you're interested in innocent spouse, then you can actually apply to have that joint liability separated as if you had both filed married filing separate returns. So let me give you an example of how that might apply. If the husband, spouse, was self-employed and didn't make any estimated tax payments, and the wife, spouse, was a wage earner, that means she received a paycheck and had an appropriate withholding from her paycheck, then the separate liability election would actually benefit the wife because she is very likely to have had enough withholding, or definitely much more withholding and much less of an outstanding tax liability if she had filed a separate return. Therefore, a separate liability election could be really great for a person like that. Or it could actually be a situation where you had 2 spouses and they were both self-employed, but one spouse actually made estimated tax payments and the other did not. A separate liability election would help in that situation as well. Or third situation where both spouses were actually both self-employed, but one made disproportionately much more money. One spouse made $100,000 and the other spouse made $25,000 in their separate self-employed incomes. Then obviously a separate liability election would help the person who made the least money in that situation. The third type of innocent spouse is what's called equitable relief, and that means essentially that even though you don't qualify for one of the first 2 types of innocent spouse relief, that it's unfair to hold you responsible, and or it would create an economic hardship in order to force you to pay. So that means essentially that you don't have the means to repay the liability, and that's a key factor in equitable relief. What documentation do you need to apply and sustain an innocent spouse determination? We need to fill out a Form 433A, which is called a collection information statement for individuals and self-employed people, and a 433B if you're actually self-employed, or if you have an LLC or a corporation. So let me make that a little bit more clear. You need to file the Form 433B if you have a limited liability company or a corporation. You can probably get away with the A if you're a sole proprietorship, self-employed in that fashion. You also need to fill out a Form 8857. You have to provide 3 months worth of documentation proving your expenses and income in a Form 12510. And you need to also provide any proof of your claim to be relieved of your tax debt. For example, court records showing the dissolution of the marriage or the separation agreement, police records if you were a victim of domestic violence, or things of that nature, and anything else that you think might be pertinent and relevant to your case. Now, you need to know that if you file a request for innocent spouse relief, that your spouse, your ex-spouse, your former spouse, will be notified of that attempt to do so. So if the person is violent or whatnot, you want to make sure that you make your claim for innocent spouse when you're in a situation where you're extremely safe. There's also a time limitation for innocent spouse. The claim must be filed within 2 years of the first collection activity by the IRS. Now, what does collection activity mean? Well, it means a lot of things, but it essentially means, well, one of the examples is 2 years from the date of a final notice of intent to levy. It can also mean 2 years from the date that they first kept a refund. So essentially, if you've been officially notified in some fashion that you owe the money, then the time clock starts to tick 2 years from that date. Now, it doesn't count for just routine statements or bills from the IRS. So you're going to might want to go ahead and have a tax professional if you're interested in doing innocent spouse, because I think it's actually one of the most complicated IRS problem resolution solutions that one could undertake on their own. You might want to have a tax professional make sure that the 2 years has not elapsed and help walk you through this process. If you have questions about innocent spouse, if you want assistance in providing an innocent spouse application, or if you want a thorough analysis on how to best solve your IRS problem, I would invite you to visit our website at getirshelp.com. You can also call us toll free at 888-438-6474. We represent clients throughout the state of Florida, throughout the United States, and in fact throughout the world. So I invite you to give us a call and see what we can do to help you with your innocent spouse claim. Thanks.